Is Antonio Brown the best value in fantasy football drafts right now? That and much, much more coming up on today's episode of 2 Point Stance. Jeff, what do you think? Is Antonio Brown one of the best values out there right now?
He's certainly in the group. He's landing it with guys like I really like Mike Williams in that area. We've heard positive buzz. That's going to be a very crowded room in Tampa Bay. And I do think he's got a great opportunity. He's certainly got to connect.
And we already saw half a season and the entire playoffs where Brady really liked him. And even if you go back to his time with the Patriots that one game, they seem to have this connection there. And I looked this up. It's kind of mind-blowing, but Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, and Antonio Brown, they played 11 total games together. In those games, Chris Godwin had 78 targets. Mike Evans had 77, and Antonio Brown had 76. So these guys are getting evenly peppered with balls from Tom Brady. Another thing that really jumps out to me is in their last 6 games, Antonio Brown has 6 touchdowns. So we know what this guy can do. He was like the consensus wide receiver one for 6 straight years, takes a year and a half off, and now suddenly everybody forgot what he's capable of. So I am loving Antonio Brown this year. But real quickly, I just want to thank everybody for tuning into another episode of 2 Point Stance. I'm Dave Kluge, and today I am here with Jeff Bell, a very, very good friend of mine. Today's episode 3 of the series that we've been doing, where we do a deep dive into every division, and today we are going to be covering the NFC and the AFC South. Lauren is unavailable, so Jeff and I are going to run it today, but I just want to remind you to subscribe to our YouTube page at youtube.com/footballguystv. And one other thing is that if you are into rankings and watching shows like this time of year, you're probably a pretty serious fantasy player. And we all know that consistently winning at fantasy football is challenging and it takes a lot of time. So go to footballguys.com because you need to get yourself a premium subscription. It'll give you an edge and help make winning decisions for you in even less time. Head to footballguys.com, click on the orange button in the upper right that says join now, and take advantage of that offer. We'll do the work and you do the winning. So, Jeff, I wanted to start today's show with the defending Super Bowl champs, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They've got some great storylines to talk about. That whole wide receiver trio we just touched on a little bit. But something else I want to talk about. Right now, Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones are back-to-back in ADP, in rankings. Everywhere you look, nobody seems to know what to do with this backfield. So what are you doing? Are you drafting Ronald Jones or are you looking Leonard Fournette's way?
I would take Rojo between the two of them, Ronald Jones. I believe that Ronald Jones is more talented. He's the younger back. I think he's working harder to maybe earn that trust with Tom Brady. My concern, as I look at these two guys, and then I look at the addition of Gio Bernard, and we mentioned the wide receivers, and you got to talk about Rob Gronkowski and O.J. Howard as well. This might be the most talented team in the league when it comes to flex options for fantasy football. And that is a lot of mouths to feed. And we see Gio Bernard come in, and he seems like he may be Tom Brady's hand-picked passing down guy because there was a lot of frustration with the drops that between Rojo and Leonard Fournette last year. And so this is the type of thing, we've seen the Tom Brady offense before, and Tom Brady is going to rely on guys that he can rely on. And so if you're drafting one of these guys, is it going to turn into a hot hand situation that you can't predict going in week to week? And then is Gio Bernard going to siphon off some of that passing game work? And are you really left with just a mess of a situation?
Yeah, I mean, that really is the dreaded word that we always hear, hot hand. And you hear it with Tom Brady and you hear it with Bruce Arians. So the two of them together just kind of makes this backfield a little bit of a disaster. And I think you hit it on the head too, is, last year, Ronald Jones was far and away the better runner between the two of them. And Leonard Fournette was able to prop his value up with some pass catching ability. But now with Gio Bernard there, like you said, it just siphons that away from both of them. So, I mean, if I have to choose one, I'm probably leaning towards Ronald Jones because we know that he is the more talented runner. He's a little bit younger, but the drops, the fumbles, those are the things that get you yanked off of Tom Brady's field really quickly. So none of these guys really instill a lot of confidence. But yeah, that backfield is going to be an absolute mess. So we know that they're all going to be running the ball. Ronald Jones, Leonard Fournette, Gio Bernard. And what we do know for certain is that Tom Brady is not going to be rushing the ball at all. So much is made nowadays about needing one of those rushing quarterbacks in order to really lock in, the Konami code, as everybody's calling it now. Tom Brady isn't going to rush, but, a lot of people are putting him in that elite tier. Matt Waldman actually has him as the overall QB1. So what are you thinking this year with Tom Brady? Do you think he can be an elite fantasy option despite his inability to rush the ball?
Well, can is a relative term. Certainly, it is available that he could do it. I'm not counting on it. I think that when you look at the rushing quarterbacks and you look at where Brady's scoring came in last year, Brady did have a phenomenal year. And we saw Aaron Rodgers kind of in that mold too, where a guy that's not going to rush, and Aaron Rodgers ended up quarterback 2-3, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. So it certainly can, but I can't get him there because, again, we defer to the rushing quarterbacks. And I think when you really look at the upside, you're really looking at where scoring came in last year. There's about a 3 or 4 point game difference between a Tom Brady type quarterback where he was last year and some of the high end quarterbacks. And so to say he's an elite option, I would feel comfortable with him as my quarterback 1, but I wouldn't draft him anywhere near that top 5 tier. And really what I would prefer to do with him is pair him up with a guy, maybe Trey Lance or maybe Justin Fields, that is going to bring that upside maybe later in the year. The thing we do need to mention with Brady, he's 44 and he just won the Super Bowl. And so certainly he's going to play till 50, but you might get into a situation where he's 44 and it starts to really fall off. And despite all the weapons that are around him, it's going to be great for fantasy production, but kind of having that safe option that you can put with one of these rookie quarterbacks. And then if one of these rookie hits, like we saw with Deshaun Watson in the past, then you're in a really great situation moving forward.
Yeah, and like we have been betting against Brady for years now, it seems like. I remember like 7 years ago where they were saying, this is the end of Brady. I can't remember what year it was. I want to say it was 2015, 2016, where he got off to a pretty slow start and everyone said, this is the end of Brady. And he's just gone on to win 3 Super Bowls since then. So you can never really bet against him. But, I was talking with JJ Zacharyson last week and he pointed something out that there's just almost no correlation year over year when you're looking at passing numbers from a quarterback, whether it be passing volume, passing yards, passing touchdowns. It is so hard to guess how that is going to translate year over year. And the one sticky number that you can guess year over year that continues to translate is rushing ability. And you're going to see that with your Lamar Jacksons and your Kyler Murray's, Josh Allen's, those guys. So it does make it really tough for me to put Brady in that same tier, knowing that he's not going to have the floor. He's going to have some games where he's just not going to throw for 4 touchdowns and 400 yards and really going to hurt you because he doesn't have that floor. So I understand that he might finish as the QB1 because of this, second year in this Bruce Arians offense, but there are a lot of red flags there. So let's stick with the NFC South, and I want to keep talking about quarterbacks. Let's talk about the Saints because Drew Brees is gone. Tom Brady was able to outlast him, and now we're torn between Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston. Who do you think is going to be the Week 1 starter in New Orleans?
I hate to cop out, but why not both? I absolutely think both are going to have a role. I think Jameis Winston would have heard something that he wanted to hear in order to re-sign there and not go into a different place. But we've seen how Sean Payton values Taysom Hill. And I think that the versatility of Taysom Hill is something that is very unique for the position. And I think that what we saw last year with Taysom Hill coming in and Payton being enamored with him, the hope was that he would be able to take it over in that stretch and he'd feel comfortable as this is my guy. And, he's going to be my franchise quarterback. And I don't think he got there. And so I think what's going to happen and kind of what we're seeing, Jameis Winston is going to be there. He's going to be brought along. He's going to be developed. And maybe he will certainly be the starting quarterback that takes the first snap. But I think both of these guys are going to play. And I think you're looking at a very messy situation in terms of fantasy.
Man, I hear so many people say that, and like it sounds like it makes so much sense. You just have 2 good quarterbacks with very different skill sets. But as long as I've been a football fan, I can't remember ever really seeing that. Like we saw glimpses of it last year, where they'd bring in the Colts would bring in Jacoby Brissett because you weren't going to get that fear of Phillip Rivers rushing the ball. But I've never seen somebody go out and have quarterbacks as kind of a deployment like this. But you could totally see it happen. I am going to lean towards Jameis Winston. I feel like I have to plant my flag one way or another. And there were so many teams out there that it made sense for Jameis Winston to go to. Like, I feel like if he could have gone to the Broncos, if he could have gone to the Panthers, shoot, he could have gone to the Bears before they got Andy Dalton. There were just so many options for him to play. And I think the fact that he stayed in New Orleans, there has to be some sort of vote of confidence there that they gave him, telling him that he's going to be the Week 1 starter. It would just shock me to see him coming off a year where, yes, he did lead the league in interceptions, but he also led in passing touchdowns and yards. Or I'm sorry, not touchdowns. I believe he was number 2 in touchdowns, but he led the league in passing yards. It would just be crazy for me to see him come off that season in Tampa Bay and then ride the pine for 2 full years. So I like to think that they're going to go with Jameis, but you make some good points that we might see some sort of quarterback by committee.
And I do want to mention too, we kind of have seen it a little bit in the past with Taysom Hill coming in with Drew Brees, and they usually run more gimmick plays, and they'll split Brees out wide, and a defender will go with him, and they'll throw a deep pass with Taysom because we knew Brees didn't have that ability anymore, and so that's kind of where I land with it. But I do think that if you're placing a bet between the two of them, Taysom Hill's upside, if he were to go in there as that rushing quarterback, and not only that, being able to add maybe some receptions if you're in a PPR league and kind of have some of that flexibility to, get points, not exactly the traditional quarterback way, but especially in a super flex league, he might be a guy that can sneak into a quarterback role.
Yeah, and the thing is, knowing the role that he could take there, he could play less than 50% of the snaps and still have QB1 weeks because he's going to get some rushing touchdowns.
That's
That
right.
he's going to be getting all the premium touches. And then, like you said, if they drop some gimmick plays where he's catching the ball on top of that too, yeah, that could be he could be a nice pull. Very high risk, very high reward, but it's not like you have to invest that much to get him. He's sliding down draft boards everywhere right now. So I do like that. I might start targeting targeting Taysom Hill in some of my drafts. But anyway, I want to stick with this team for just a little bit. Obviously, we know I don't know if it's going to be Alvin Kamara or Michael Thomas leading the team in targets, but we know it's going to be those two sitting at 1 and 2 one way or another. Who's going to step up as number 3 here? We hear about so many different names getting thrown around. Are you confident that any of these guys could step up as a number 3 option?
Not outside of different gimmick plays, shot plays. We've seen Traequan Smith do it in the past. We saw maybe a little glimpse of Marquise Callaway having some production. I think Deontay Harris is a guy that's a little bit forgotten about, that we've seen him make some plays. If I were to defer to a third option, Adam Troutman kind of seems like the guy, just because traditionally we've kind of seen the tight end. We saw Jared Cook kind of emerge as that third option as much as there was. But this is one of those offenses in the league. You exactly hit it right, that it just filters everything through Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara that we've seen in the past. And so I do have the expectation that we'll see that again.
And I want to believe in Traequan Smith. He was just so exciting coming in as a rookie and has just failed to live up to it, but he has all the measurables and all the talent. We've just yet to see him really put it together. Because he's more of a downfield threat, I'm hoping that somebody like Jameis Winston could be a little bit more useful to him than Drew Brees was later on in his career. So I'm still holding faith that it could be Traequan Smith. Now, I know you called out Adam Troutman, and that's a guy right now who is just becoming everybody's favorite sleeper, because we saw it at the end of the season where he had some plays, drawn up just specifically to get him the ball, and he looked okay, but there's just nothing about him that really wows me. He's not exceptionally fast. He's not exceptionally big. He's just kind of a guy that, might end up in a role seeing a lot of targets, but I don't know if he's got the same upside as a lot of other tight ends. So I'm going to go with Traequan Smith here. Again, it's a tough question, but if I got to plant my flag somewhere, I think Traequan Smith has to step up. And for me, like I said, I think Jameis is going to be the starting quarterback here. And we saw Jameis, easily support Mike Williams and Chris Godwin. So in the back of my mind, when I'm sitting in the 14th, 15th round of my drafts and Traequan Smith is there, all I can think about is Godwin and Evans in Tampa. And I realize it's a very, very different offense, but we know that Jameis can sling it. So I'm still weirdly optimistic about Traequan Smith. Haven't quite quit on him yet.
Well, and he's the type of guy too, one play and it pays off for you. So certainly if you're in a best ball format or, a deeper redraft format, if you need to plug him in there, it only takes one.
Yeah. So let's talk. We mentioned that Kamara is going to be one of the top guys there, but a lot of his fantasy value came from those checkdowns. It's almost like, rather than Drew Brees just turning around and handing the ball off to Kamara, they'd flare him out into space and then you'd throw the ball to him and just help so much with the PPR scoring. So I'm wondering, now that we don't have Drew Brees anymore, regardless of who it is, we saw some games with Taysom Hill last year, but do you think that Kamara can still remain elite? I mean, last year he was unanimously top 3. The year before he was unanimously top 3. Do you think that he still belongs in that top 3 category without Drew Brees?
Gosh, that's a good question. That's a fantastic question. I certainly ability and skill wise, he's there. One would like to think that Sean Payton saw the usage last year when Taysom Hill was in, and they're going to maybe go back to the drawing board if it is Taysom Hill and redesign that offense to feature Kamara more. it's one of those things, open question too, on Michael Thomas' ability. Is there ability drop off with Michael Thomas there that they're going to have to go through Kamara more? So there are so many questions about this offense. And it's one of those things that you run through the running backs there. You've got the injury with Saquon Barkley, and you've got the passing upside, lack of upside with Derrick Henry. And so I'm not going to blame anybody if they're going to make him their running back 3, but it's just every single one of those running backs have questions.
Yeah, I feel like I can't even call out how, elite of a player Alvin Kamara is in his own respect. If you just go look at his, page on Player Profiler right now, they break it up into opportunity, productivity, and efficiency. And this guy is just single-digit rankings across the board in everything. Yes. He gets the opportunity, but it's not like he's one of those guys that's just given the ball a lot and doesn't do much with it. He's extremely efficient with it. He's productive with everything that he does. I mean, it's just number 1 in rushing yards, number 1 in receiving yards, number 1 in receptions, number 1 in touchdowns, number 1 in fantasy points per game, number 1 in fantasy points per opportunity. And then, like I said, when you look at his efficiency, he's number 2 in yards per touch. He's number 3 in evaded tackles. He's number 2 in juke rate. I mean, this guy really does it all, no matter how you look at it. So I will admit that his value might have been propped up a little bit in fantasy because of Drew Brees. But let's not take away from the talent that is Alvin Kamara. And right now, I feel like people are kind of overblowing what the departure of Drew Brees does. He is still elite any way you look at it. And while I don't have him inside my top 3, I'm not going to fault anybody for still putting him up there because we know this guy can play football. 110%. Now let's stick with the NFC North. We got 2 more teams to get through. And now I want to talk about the Falcons. They ponied up this year's 4th overall pick for a tight end, which is the highest we have seen a tight end get drafted in recent history. So do you think that Kyle Pitts is going to buck the trend of rookie tight ends, or do you expect it to be a little bit disappointing given his ADP?
You know me, I'm all in on Kyle Pitts. I'm going for it. I think that he is going to fill that Julio Jones role. I look at the Atlanta Falcons roster right now, and they don't have a wide receiver above 6'1" right now. So there's one big guy on that roster. It's Kyle Pitts. We saw Arthur Smith's offense in Tennessee. They used tight end. I think it was something like 3rd most in the league in 2 tight end sets. And what I think is going to happen is they're going to put Hayden Hurst in that traditional tight end role and allow him to be more in line, allow him to chip on the defensive ends, allow him to help on the backside, those type of things. And they're going to flex Kyle Pitts all over the field and use him very similar to how they used Julio Jones, simply because we've seen that role in the Matt Ryan offense. And I know they're going to a new offense, new scheme, whatever it might be, but we've seen Arthur Smith in the past rely on big wide receivers too. And so I don't know that we can call Kyle Pitts a tight end. I think that the way they're going to use him, he's almost going to be a wide receiver. And so we might have a completely different bar that we're judging on. And, if it goes like this, we might be having a fight in fantasy football in a couple of years about his eligibility, because people that have him in keeper formats or things like that are going to hold tight to that tight end. But if you don't have him, you're going to want him to turn him into a wide receiver as soon as possible.
Oh man. Yeah, I'm having flashbacks already to Jimmy Graham when he wanted to get paid like a wide receiver. We've seen this before. Yeah. And I think that would be the biggest thing right now. I worry just historically, I feel like we have seen this so many times where we fall in love with a rookie tight end and they don't pan out their first year. And I'll be the first to admit that Kyle Pitts is a different type of prospect, but it's just the learning curve for being a pro tight end is so much more drastic than it is for any other position. So if you are in fact correct, where, we see it in the preseason when they come out with their starters, if Hayden Hurst is playing that inline role and they're just putting Kyle Pitts out wide, putting him in the slot, I think I'll change my tune a little bit. But if they're expecting him to still be in there run blocking and picking up pass blocking, then I'm going to worry just a little bit. So we'll see how this is. I've got my flag planted right now that I think that he's a little bit overrated, but I could switch that up once we see some preseason games a little bit. Now, another guy that I want to talk about on this team is Mike Davis, because Mike Davis had a very underwhelming career up until last year. Christian McCaffrey went down. Mike Davis came over and just filled in as close to Christian McCaffrey as you could expect. So now this year, it looks like he is sitting atop the depth chart in Atlanta. Do you think that he's going to be a workhorse there, like we've seen Arthur Smith do with Derrick Henry, or do you think this is going to be more of a committee coming out of Atlanta?
So I don't know that Arthur Smith wanted to use Derrick Henry the way that he was used last year. They used that 3rd-round pick on Darrington Evans, and I think that they wanted to kind of use him in the passing role. which would create an open question because we've seen the buzz coming out of camp all on Kadri Olesen. And it seems like he is that bigger back that fits the role that we saw with Derrick Henry more traditionally. Mike Davis certainly is not a small back, but I almost wonder if we might see a situation, and I know other people are on Javian Hawkins, the rookie out of Louisville, but he was undrafted, and I think that if they really bought into him, they probably would have made sure they got him. My open question would be, I wonder if Kadri Olesen might be in that, that first, second down role that we saw with Derrick Henry, and Mike Davis might be used a little bit more as the third down back, as a little bit more as the passing back. And certainly he's going to get his carries. I do believe that. And I think ability wise, he's slightly ahead of Olesen, but I think that Olesen's an underrated player. And I think that there's certainly potential there. And maybe it's almost a Miami Dolphins situation last year where we kind of knew the name on Jordan Howard. And so we kind of bought in knowing the name. And as soon as the season starts, the other guys getting the ball and everybody's wondering what's happening here. And so Olesen is a guy that at his value, I'm grabbing a lot of, just because Mike Davis he's kind of falling in the in between area where if he turns into that bell cow, he's getting underdrafted right now. But if he doesn't, he's badly getting overdrafted. And so it's very iffy, and it's hard for me to buy in all the way, just because, and I'm sure you can probably relate as a Bears fan, we've seen a body of work on Mike Davis's career, and is he the guy that we saw over that course of whatever it might be, or is he the guy last year? And then coming out of college, he looked much more explosive than what he turned out to be, and he had an injury right coming out, and that affected things. But there has been questions about work ethic in the past with why he washed out of San Francisco, and so I wonder if we're not looking maybe fitting the roles a little bit wrong, and the people that want to buy in Javian Hawkins should maybe be shifting to Kadri Olesen.
God, I think you hit the nail right on the head there. People I think are very excited because of what we saw from Mike Davis last year, and now he is a household name. And that comparison to Jordan Howard, like, that just kind of made my stomach drop a little bit, because I wasn't too excited about Jordan Howard last year, but at the same time, it was like, this is a guy that should see 200 touches, and I can get him in the 5th or 6th round. And I drafted quite a lot of Jordan Howard last year, and I regretted it as the season rolled on. So that's a good call out. One other thing I want to say is Javian Hawkins. Just stop trying to make Javian Hawkins happen. Had we not had James Robinson last year, the undrafted free agent that finishes an RB1, nobody would even be talking about Javian Hawkins. But people are so excited to get that, this year's James Robinson. Well, guess what? James Robinson wasn't an outlier. There isn't going to be another James Robinson. So stop drafting Javian Hawkins. Okay, I got one more talking point that I want to talk about with the Falcons, and that is Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley was pegged as a huge breakout player last year and did everything that you want to see from a guy. I mean, he came out and finished as a wide receiver 1. So now with Julio Jones gone, what is his ceiling? Does this help him, or do you think it hurts him?
I think it helps. I don't know that it helps him so much as it doesn't affect him, because we've seen Julio Jones be out of the lineup in the past, and his production's been perfectly fine. And he finished as PPR wide receiver 4 over on a per game average. And so I think he's got the ability. He could be wide receiver 1 overall if they pump the ball to him. Depends a lot, lands on how they use the other options around him. Is Russell Gage really going to be the slot receiver that gets a lot of targets? Is Zacchaeus going to be on the field just to kind of stretch the field and leave things open underneath for Kyle Pitts and Calvin Ridley? Is Pitts going to get big volume? But as they say, the ceiling is the roof. I feel like for Calvin Ridley, and he could certainly take that other little mini step up and be the overall wide receiver number 1.
Yeah, I think that his ceiling literally is just that. Like you said, the wide receiver 1. So I looked at it in games with Julio Jones and games without Julio Jones. In games with Julio last year, he saw 8.4 targets, 5.7 receptions, 87 yards per game. And then he played 7 games without Julio. And in those games, he saw 11.3 targets, 7.1 receptions, and 109 yards per game. Now, the one thing that was drastically different was his touchdown rate. Without Julio, his touchdown rate was cut in half. But, given the 7-game sample sizes, it's kind of tough to draw too many conclusions from that. But one thing is obvious. When Julio Jones wasn't there, he got a hefty serving of opportunity, over 11 targets per game. So I think you can expect to see that again next year. And that alone should put him in that wide receiver 1 conversation. Okay, last team to talk about, the Panthers. And I'm going to start with one right here that would probably have a lot of people scratching their head if they heard this last offseason. But now, heading into 2021, would you rather draft Robbie Anderson or DJ Moore?
I'm still going with DJ Moore, but it is an interesting question given the value, because that's something that you do need to consider, the value coming in. I'm trouble getting all the way there on Sam Darnold, and I think that's kind of hung me up. And I know we saw Teddy Bridgewater last year, and Teddy Bridgewater, ability wise, certainly isn't Sam Darnold. But we've seen Robbie Anderson and Sam Darnold before, and that was very disappointing. And now Robbie Anderson's usage is much different in Carolina than what we saw with the Jets. And what the Carolina asked the receivers to do, a lot of crossing patterns, a lot of underneath stuff, kind of plays right into Sam Darnold. And so I don't know that there should be the gap that what we're seeing. And so to fairly answer your question, if I'm buying in at value, Robbie Anderson would be the one. But if I'm just straight up taking them, I do think that DJ Moore is going to be the guy. And it's an open question if, how much of the passing work, we kind of saw the running backs phased out of the passing game, and then kind of that go to Curtis Samuel as the year went on. Mike Davis' usage was dramatically different in the first part of the year. With Christian McCaffrey coming in, that's not going to be the case. He's going to get the ball. And if Terrace Marshall, the rookie wide receiver out of LSU, that's another guy that he has the ability, and if he's able to step forward, then maybe we have multiple mouths to feed and we're kind of in a messy situation. But there's also that chance that we finally see it from DJ Moore, that he's finally that wide receiver one that we've been waiting on forever.
Yeah, we've seen the flashes, and he's just yet to be able to put it together over a full season. I still love Robbie Anderson at his value right now, going in the 7th or 8th round. He out-targeted DJ Moore last year. But I'm glad that you called out Terrence Marshall, because he was somebody that pre-draft was like everybody's favorite receiver. They were saying this is like the one big-bodied guy that can really take on that alpha role in an offense. And then he got drafted to Carolina, and everybody just forgot about him. So I'm glad that you called him up, because he does still exist, and he's going to be a part of that offense. But since you brought up Sam Darnold, let's talk about that a little bit. We've seen so many players, most notably Ryan Tannehill, just come out from under Adam Gase's shadow and just completely turn their career around. Still just 23 years old. Do you think Sam Darnold can do that?
He has the ability, and he can make every throw. The concern is, and even going back to college, even before Adam Gase touched him, he's always had turnover issues. And so that's my concern with him, is that what you're going to see is, if he turns the ball over, what's going to happen there? I have all the faith in the world in Joe Brady. I think Joe Brady is an excellent offensive coordinator, and I think that he can bring the best out of Sam Darnold. If anybody's going to do it, if any situation is going to do it, it will be this one right now. And we have seen, it does seem like people are more willing to buy in now on Darnold versus what we've seen production-wise. The turnovers are concerning. And we saw, the moment in the Patriots game where he's seeing ghosts, and you always go back to that. And it's fair to wonder, even his college film, if he's a guy that everything has just kind of been moving too fast for him. And he just still hasn't gotten there at the NFL level. And the game is just moving a little bit too fast.
Yeah, I know everybody is really hoping. And first of all, happy birthday, Sam Darnold. I missed it. He is now 24 years old. I looked that up while you were talking. So a young 24-year-old, but still very young. And a lot of people are hoping for this turnaround. But I'm kind of with you. We see him make these crazy difficult throws where it's almost like he's like unconscious, and then he just flicks his wrist and makes an amazing throw. And then he just can't, read the simple coverage. So, maybe a good coach can really help turn him around. But like you said, in college, this is a problem that has just followed him forever. So I don't know if it's something that we're just magically going to see flip on its head this year. Now let's keep this one short. I feel like this is just a yes or no question. Is there any reason that you should not take Christian McCaffrey at the 101 in your standard scoring? Not standard, just your PPR 12-man non-super flex league? Is there any reason not to take McCaffrey 101?
No, of course not.
All right. Well, that's my answer too. So if you're listening to the show, be sure to download the Footballguys mobile app today if you have not already. It can be used on all smartphones and gives you the same tools that you will find on our website. And I want to call out our newly renovated website. If you haven't checked it out already, do it. It looks incredible. But back to the app, our Draft Dominator app will make sure that you have an edge above your teammates and league mates by customizing your advice specifically to your team. Download today so Footballguys can help you win. All right, we are done with the NFC South. Time to move to the AFC South. And let's start with the Titans. Historically, this run-first team. Do you expect Julio Jones and A.J. Brown to both be viable fantasy options on a team that has run the second most of any team behind the Ravens over the last 2 years?
I do, because you don't bring Julio Jones in and not give him the ball. And we've seen AJ Brown was hurt for a large portion of last year, and he's kind of playing off injury. And I believe he got surgery on both of his knees after the season's over. So, he kind of toughed it out throughout the season. We saw Corey Davis kind of reach that fringe fantasy utility. If they're just pumping the ball through both of these two guys, then I have all the faith in the world that despite the lower volume on this offense, we'll see plenty of production to put them into very fantasy relevant players.
Sorry, I wasn't sure if my mic picked that up. I've got a train that's driving by just a couple blocks away right now. Not sure how sensitive this mic is. But yeah, I agree with you 100%. So many people that are acting like they brought in Julio Jones on a $15 million a year contract just to block. Get out of here. I think it's going to be a very, very different team than we've seen over the last few years out of Tennessee. And you've got to use your imagination a little bit because so many things change. Corey Davis was a phenomenal run blocker. Jonnu Smith is one of the best run blocking tight ends in the league. They lost both of those guys, and not that Julio Jones can't run block, but that's not what they brought him in for. They have two of the just biggest, most efficient wide receivers in the league on their team, not to mention Derrick Henry, who's an efficiency monster himself. So I think that we're going to see a big dip in Derrick Henry's volume, and I think this is going to be a very different looking Titans team. I've got to say, of every single team in the league, I think I'm more excited to see the Titans week 1 than anybody else, just to see how this all comes together. So sticking with the Titans, I just mentioned Derrick Henry. Do you think he has any chance of repeating his 2020 season? And by that, I just mean the bar, 2,000 yards. Is there any chance Derrick Henry hits 2,000 yards this year?
There's a chance. I mean, it's happened before. It happened last year. Back-to-back 2,000-yard seasons would certainly be unprecedented. And obviously, he's a guy that he's getting more mileage on him, but he's as they say, built different. And so certainly he has the ability. But it goes back to what's this offense going to look like? A new offensive coordinator, bringing Julio Jones in, having more weapons than they had in the past, not having those great run blockers, but, a guy that maybe Darrington Evans steals some work, and we see him kind of in that Deion Lewis role that they used to have. And maybe Ferkser gets some work out of the tight end role. And so would I bet on it? No, but I'm not going to bet on anybody getting 2,000 yards. But it does bring up an interesting point because with the 17th game, I mean, the math changes a little bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, it increases the odds a little bit, but, Derrick Henry was the 7th guy in NFL history to rush for 2,000 yards. The next season averages for those 6 players, 1,072 rushing yards. That's what the average comes out to. Not a single guy was able to even eclipse the 1,500 mark. So historically, these guys don't do too well after a 2,000-yard season. And then to, just add another little layer to it, Barry Sanders was the only guy that did it at an older age than Derrick Henry did last year. So most of these guys that came out were young when they hit 2,000 and then still struggled the following year. Now Derrick Henry's heading into that, 27-year range where people start to get scared. And like you said, he's built different. I mean, he could be, not that Tom Brady is this, physical specimen like Derrick Henry, but, like basketball in a way. LeBron James is still out here. Everybody's been counting on LeBron James to fall off for years, and he still remains one of the best players in the NBA. So we might see something similar with Derrick Henry. But for me, you already called out some of the red flags there. With him still getting drafted 4th, 5th overall, I would much rather go in a different direction. I feel like his performance last year is inflating his value a bit heading into this year, and he's the one guy in the first round that I'm almost just completely off on. One other thing I want to talk about, though, is, we've talked about a few guys that people have kind of fallen in love with, especially tight ends like Adam Troutman a little bit ago. One of those guys was Anthony Ferkser, and I think a lot of the reason for that is because of the vacated targets that they were going to lose to Jonnu Smith and Corey Davis. But now with Julio Jones there, is Anthony Ferkser somebody that you are still targeting in your leagues?
I'm not touching him right now. So what's happening, and it's maybe not even anything to do with his ability. I think he's certainly a fine football player. He's not a special player by any means. My concern, I look at Ferkser, maybe we'll get to it with Indy. I look at Buffalo with Dawson Knox, and I have a really hard time buying into the tight end simply because one name is looming out there. Zach Ertz is the name that's looming out there. And I think he's going to, it's one of those things, he's going to land somewhere. I would have to believe he's not going to be back in Philly again. And maybe he is, and maybe it would be a surprise. My concern, that Tennessee seems like they are all in, trading the pick for Julio Jones. And if he were to become available, that seems like maybe a landing place for him. And so what you're looking at with Ferkser is, even with his upside right now, I don't see him as a tight end 1. And so he doesn't really seem like as a guy in your redraft roster that you will really want to roster coming out of your drafts, just because I just don't see, we go back to the volume. And if Julio Jones is eating and AJ Brown's eating and Derrick Henry's eating, and even if there's some other utility for a guy like Evans, like we mentioned, what's going to be left for the tight end? Not only on top of that, but again, it's just, I have a hard time buying in on some of these guys that aren't the most known names and have the most ability, with a name like Zach Ertz still looming.
That's a good point. I didn't even think about that. The one thing I'd say about Zach Ertz is, I thought that window to trade him was a long time ago. I thought he would have been traded by now. I wonder if Philly is struggling to find a suitor for somebody who really hasn't been able to stay healthy for the last few years. And I believe his contract is, I think it's around $8 million. And that is completely off the top of my head. I could be wrong. I will look that up. If it's wrong, look down in the comments and I'll fix it. But I believe that he's making around $8 million this year, which is a lot of money for a veteran tight end that's been injured a lot. One other thing about Anthony Firkser is, everybody's acting like he was suddenly, in this position to just see so many targets. It's not like Jonnu Smith was a target hog seeing 120, 150 targets a season. Jonnu Smith saw 65 targets last year. Anthony Firkser was already the guy that was running the routes. Well, Jonnu was asked more to block. So I'm with you. I was kind of buying into the Firkser hype a little bit because it was this situation of like, well, somebody has to catch the ball. And, well, they got that somebody with Julio Jones. So I'm off on Firkser as well. Now let's go talk about the Jaguars. I feel like we could do an entire hour-long show on the Jaguars because they have just completely flipped that organization upside down. So let's start with their running back room. Are you more interested in drafting James Robinson or Travis Etienne this year?
Yeah, I think this is the most interesting team in the league. Coming in with Urban Meyer, certainly from a fantasy perspective, my guy is Travis Etienne. I'm buying that. They used the first-round pick on him, and I think that he's got a role in the Urban Meyer offense. We've seen Curtis Samuel at Ohio State, and we saw Percy Harvin at Florida. And they creatively scheme up ways to get touches out of the backfield, screen passes, touches on jet sweeps, these type of just creative ways to get the ball. And I think that he's going to be the primary offensive weapon in Jacksonville, and he's the single guy that I want to buy in on that offense.
I'm with you. James Robinson, I feel like his role is going to be first and second down between the 20s. And, as useful as that is to an NFL team, that doesn't do much for fantasy football. You're going to be looking at some of these games where James Robinson might have, 70 yards and no touchdowns and no receptions. And, what was, 15, 20 touches is going to turn out to 6 or 7 points in a fantasy. That's not the type of running back you want. I think that Travis Etienne is going to see the passing down work, which, is much more beneficial. And then something else you called out is that kind of gadgety player that he is. He really worries me because of Laviska Shenault is somebody that I thought was going to take on that exact role you were talking about, the Percy Harvin type role in an Urban Meyer offense. And now I worry that Etienne is going to cut into that, and we're not going to see it from Shenault. So we already called it out. I mean, this team is so intriguing with all of the different things they can do, how all of these pieces are going to fit together. Very, very excited to see it. But let's move on to the quarterback. The first overall pick this year, generational talent, best guy to come out of college since Andrew Luck. Say whatever you want about him. Is Trevor Lawrence somebody that should be a target in redraft leagues?
So to talk about Trevor Lawrence, I think we need to loop back just real quickly on the running backs. And I think that you kind of need to divorce the traditional mindset of a NFL offense and passing down work and those type of things. And what I expect is going to see out of the Jacksonville offense, I think you're going to see a lot of RPO, and it's going to feel a lot more like a college offense. And so what James Robinson is going to kind of be that dive guy on the RPO. And then Trevor Lawrence is going to pull it, and he's going to have Etienne as options. And so he's going to be running the ball a lot. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity there for fantasy goodness that, he's running the ball and he's got easy throws and he's able to, they're moving the ball. They're using all these wide receivers. I do think that what you're going to see out of DJ Chark and Marvin Jones is more kind of shot plays. And that's just the way that Urban Meyer's offense has functioned traditionally. They kind of use those wide receivers. Terry McLaurin was a big one at Ohio State. They would use him down the field. And so I do think that we're going to see a lot of that in the Jacksonville offense. And that creates great potential for fantasy for Trevor Lawrence. My big concern on Trevor Lawrence in fantasy terms is the guy that has a tight end next to his name, and that is Tim Tebow. And we know Urban Meyer's guy is Tim Tebow. And so if this turns into the the type of thing where he is essentially the Taysom Hill, and he's coming in the red zone, and Trevor Lawrence is coming off, and they're using him as a bulldozer, and he's doing those jump passes like he did in Florida because it's Urban Meyer and it's Tim Tebow. That's where I struggle to buy in on Trevor Lawrence, especially from a redraft standpoint, where you're kind of counting on a rookie to come in there, and if this is going to be the type of guy where he's getting some rushing yards, but if it's not a long touchdown pass, he's coming off the field, and I think that's unlikely that would happen, but it's not a given that won't happen.
Yeah, and some people are going to kind of scoff at that and say, oh, you can't possibly be worried about Tim Tebow, but who knows what's going on in Jacksonville? Like you said, that is Urban Meyer's guy, and they brought him in for a reason. I think 5 years ago, nobody expected that Tim Tebow would ever take an NFL snap again, and now here he is, reunited with his former college coach. So, yeah, I think that there is a little bit of a reason to be, trepidatious here. And then you talked about it, Trevor Lawrence does have the rushing upside, and I feel like everybody is so enamored by Justin Fields and Trey Lance and what they can bring to the table as rushing quarterbacks that they are disregarding the fact that Trevor Lawrence could easily rush for 500 or 600 yards as a rookie, and that shouldn't surprise anybody at all. He's a much better athlete than we give him credit for. So, yeah, and right now where he's getting drafted, you can pick him up as a second quarterback in a single QB league. You don't even have to start him. I mean, his ADP right now is so low that you can pick up one of your elite guys in the top 5. Pick up Trevor Lawrence, and then if he does pan out, great, you've got some trade bait out there. And if he doesn't, whatever, it costs you a 13th, 14th round pick. So, yeah, Trevor Lawrence is a guy that I'm definitely going after in redraft. And now let's talk about this one too, because I want to get your advice because I don't even have an answer for this one. Who is the wide receiver one there? Is it DJ Chark? Is it Laviska Shenault? Is it Marvin Jones? Is it Travis Etienne? Like, who is going to be the leader in receptions this year?
I think it's Travis Etienne. I really do. I think he's going to be the engine of the offense. And I think that he's going to drive people crazy. And I don't know if I can get there, but I really want to say that he's got running back PPR 1 upside. I think that he could be a RB1, a top 12 running back, because I think he can get so many catches out of the backfield and just these little plays. And we saw it with Clemson too, is the other thing too. You kind of have to take a step back there in the way that Clemson's offense functioned. And he was really the engine of that offense. Trevor Lawrence gets all the pub, and rightfully so. Trevor Lawrence is a phenomenal talent. But if you really watch Clemson, it was a lot of design passes, a lot of screen passes, a lot of get the ball in Travis Etienne's hands, and he would make something happen with it. And so I think he's the wide receiver 1. I really do. And it's really hard because everybody wants to buy in and get one of these wide receivers. And I think what you're going to be stuck with DJ Chark and Marvin Jones is waiting on a touchdown, essentially. And Laviska Shenault, I think that he can do a little bit of that Etienne, and I think he'll siphon that off. I think where the concern was and the reason why they brought in Etienne was, the track record for durability with Laviska Shenault is not fantastic. And so I think they didn't want to rely on him as being the only guy on the roster that can do those type of things. I think that he's going to do some of those type of things, and they're going to get the ball to him. And so out of the wide receivers, I think that he might be a guy that has a little bit of lower ceiling, but has a little bit more predictability in his production. Whereas DJ Chark and Marvin Jones might trade off, but they might be the guy that goes off for 25 one week. And it's going to probably be the week after you're frustrated because they had 2 and you sat them.
Yep. I think you hit that on the head. Laviska Shenault and Travis Etienne are the 2 guys I want here. Funny that we're talking about, who the wide receiver 1 is, and we both want to talk about Travis Etienne. But I'm going to have to look this up after the show because I don't know, have we ever in NFL history seen a quarterback and a running back from the same college get drafted to the same team in the first round? I mean, that has to be the only time this has ever happened. It's just unbelievable. I don't know if we've ever seen that. So they're going to come into this team already having a chemistry and a connection that's been developing for years. So while they technically are rookies, they've got this kind of deeper connection that's going to be a little bit different. So I'm with you. I've held off on the Travis Etienne RB1 talk because, it's a spicy take, but I think you're right that, that is his ceiling. There's no reason that we shouldn't look at his ceiling as being almost like a Christian McCaffrey light, where they're just, relentlessly getting the ball in his hands and letting him do work. So great call out, man. I love that one. So let's talk about Indianapolis. And obviously the biggest trade or the biggest transaction was their trade for Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz had a horrendous 2020, like painful to watch. Do you think he bounces back this year, getting reunited with Frank Reich, having an offensive line, having some weapons? What do you think?
I think that they're going to ask him to do less. And so asking him to do less to turn him more back into a football player doesn't seem like it's going to be great for fantasy production. And it's going to be an open question on how they manage those wide receivers. And I think that as much as we want Paris Campbell and Michael Pittman to be those guys, T.Y. Hilton is still lurking around, and for some reason they love to play Zach Pascal. And so it's just one of those things. And I think that maybe if he makes those steps towards recovery on becoming a better NFL quarterback, the fantasy production might not follow along. He's not a guy that you're going to draft in a redraft format. I wouldn't expect, short of a super flex, just because I think that there's more higher upside guys that are available. But he is a guy that, if you see the right things, the infrastructure is, you can't really beat it. The offensive line might be the best in the league. Jonathan Taylor certainly has the ability. We've seen Nyheim Hines out of the backfield, and so, man, I can't buy in out of the gate, and I don't think he's a guy that you should put on your redraft roster, short of deeper benches or short of a super flex situation. But I could see the development. I'm not going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. He certainly has the ability to do it.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like, I want to see it happen. I'm a big Carson Wentz fan. Like, what we saw from a young Carson Wentz was crazy. Just how strong he could stand in the pocket. He had that rushing ability. I mean, the dude just looks like a gazelle when he takes off. It's like he's taking like 5-yard strides with the ball. I mean, he's a fun player to watch. He's sneaky athletic. He's got a cannon for an arm. And, it was sad to see him just kind of fall apart over the last few years in Philly. So I think that they are going to pull the playbook back from him a little bit. He's going to be handing the ball off a lot more. Philly just kind of got to the point where they didn't have a lot else. So they were just hoping that Carson Wentz could go out there and play hero ball. And unfortunately, it didn't work out for them. So I want to see him bounce back. And my fear is that, I'm not going to draft him, because that late in the draft, especially in a single QB league, I'm going to be going for the high upside wide receivers and the handcuff running backs that can pay off. And my big fear is that Carson Wentz is going to come balling out early in the season. We're going to see the Carson Wentz that we all fell in love with a few years ago. He's going to get picked up off of waivers for, 60% of fab, and I'm never going to get a taste of him. So that's my fear. So, there's many leagues that I'm in. I think that I might throw a few of my absolute last round dart throws on Carson Wentz just in case. Now, you mentioned it already. We don't know who's going to step up. If it's going to be Paris Campbell, Michael Pittman, or T.Y. Hilton. I personally think that T.Y.'s best days are behind him. He seems like he just lives, like we should just start calling him TYQ, because he's just got that questionable tag next to his name every single week. So who do you expect to step up as the team's wide receiver number one? Is it still going to be T.Y., or do one of these younger guys finally take over?
Volume-wise, we saw when Campbell was on the field, I believe it was the beginning of last year, and they really peppered him like week 1 or week 2 it was, and then he got hurt. And so that might be the guy that gets the volume. I'm not sure that any of these guys are a number one, and I think that Nyheim Hines bears mentioned just the way that they use him in the passing game. They use him down the field, and they creatively get him the ball. And the other guy, Mo Alley-Cox, is the guy that I want Mo Alley-Cox to happen so bad. I think he's just such a fun player. He's so big, and transitioning from basketball kind of late coming into football, he does seem like a guy that that Jimmy Graham mold, and so and we've seen Carson Wentz use the tight ends in the past, and so this is going to be one of those things where and they're priced appropriately as such, where I'm not expecting a big breakout out of any of these guys, but I do think that you might get some consistent fantasy contributors.
Yeah, and they're all getting drafted as like in like the mid 40s to mid 60s. Like none of these guys are taking up a lot of draft capital. But for me, and I was hoping you were going to go this way, because you're my Ohio State guy. You're the guy that gives me these like glimpses into Ohio State players that I don't normally see. And I was hoping when I had this question that you were just going to start gushing about Paris Campbell, because what I've seen from him, I really enjoy. And like you called it out last year in week 1, we saw him get 9 targets and he did some damage with them. He picked up 71 yards, was unable to score, but they clearly wanted to get him the ball. He's a guy that just jumps. When I watch him play football, he's the guy that looks like he is just a tier above everybody else on that team. So obviously injuries have just completely squashed the start of his career, but I'm still hopeful that a healthy offseason and a new quarterback and just everything that Indianapolis has going for them, I'd love to see Paris Campbell come out on top. And out of those 3 guys, he's the guy with the lowest ADP. So you can get him for next to nothing in your draft. Now, let's
I
yeah, go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say I love placing the chip on him, and you're exactly right. He is a very physically gifted player, and he could be a special player. Again, it's just my concern that what we've seen from the Indy offense the last couple of years, they just like to spread the ball out, and so, and even when they've got one of the best running backs in football, they still like to spread the ball out, and so that's my
So,
concern stopping me from buying all the way in.
well, thank you for that lovely transition because I do want to talk about Jonathan Taylor. He's a guy that just completely took over that backfield last year. So, where are you comfortable drafting him right now? Because, when the season ended and I was doing best ball drafts in March, Jonathan Taylor was the 101. Like, people were taking him as the first guy off the board. Now it seems like the market's starting to cool on him a little bit. Where are you pulling the trigger?
He falls right in that tier with Kamara, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry for me. And it's almost we do all these best ball drafts, and it's almost I land in an area where it's 6 to 1, half a dozen other. And I feel like I need to plant my flag on somebody. When it comes to the infrastructure and the talent, I love to plant it on him. It's just that I don't know that we are going to see the usage that we might see. And it goes back to all these guys having questions. If Saquon were healthy, then he would probably be the guy. And if we felt comfortable with Derrick Henry being able to get passing game work, maybe he would be the guy. And so it's just one of those things. It's however the mood strikes me when I'm on the clock usually is the guy that I end up out of that group. And I'm not to the point of planting my flag on somebody, but he does seem like the guy that has the ability and has everything that you would want to see to kind of go into that top tier. Maybe the Dalvin Cook that we saw maybe last year, the year before, when people were kind of hesitant to really buy in on Dalvin Cook, and then all of a sudden everything just fell right. And so if it does, he's right there, and he might even be second. It's hard for me to put him above Christian McCaffrey. Just we know the usage that is going to come out of Christian McCaffrey and the ability. But again, he's just all in that cluster, and it's the way I group him up there is between 3 and 6. It seems like whoever I feel like when I'm on the clock, that's going to be my guy.
Yeah, and the one thing that we didn't see a ton of last year was utilization in the passing game. But if they're able to work that fold into what they've got in plan for Jonathan Taylor, yeah, I mean the sky is the limit for this guy. We know that he is unbelievably talented. So I'm with you though. He kind of falls in that 3 to 6, and it's really tough. And I've done the same thing many, many times. One guy that I put in that same tier that a lot of people probably disagree with is Aaron Jones, but I think Aaron Jones is in there too. So I've kind of got a 3 to 7 tier that it's like every single day I'm just basically just picking a different guy. It's really tough to pick one of them. All right, now let's try to cruise through the Texans really quick because when we're talking about any NFL team in fantasy football, I don't know if there's a worse team out there right now to try to predict than the Texans. But then again, that's what everyone said about the Jacksonville Jaguars last year. And we got James Robinson. So let's talk about him for a quick minute. David Johnson had a pretty solid 2020 season. How should you feel about him with the addition of Phillip Lindsay and Mark Ingram?
The wheels might fall off at any moment. And that's always my hesitation on buying an older running back. People want to buy in the Mark Ingram situation last year because we assume he's going to get the volume, and then the wheels fall off and you're stuck and you can't do anything with it. And so that's held me off from buying in on David Jones, and why I will hold off from buying in on David Jones.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely getting up there in age, but we saw some flashes last year when he wasn't hurt, especially at the tail end of the season. He looked like the old David Johnson, but with the next thing we'll talk about, without Deshaun Watson, that could really hurt everybody's value. So as Brandon Cooks, let's just, for the sake of conversation, assume that Deshaun Watson isn't going to play a snap this year. Are you buying Brandon Cooks, who is the team's wide receiver 1?
I think he'll be a hard buy. He'll be a great buy with the moment that it comes out that Deshaun Watson's not going to play, just because there's nobody else there. And so everybody will panic because Deshaun Watson's out. And so the price will just go down and down and down. And we've seen the ability. We've seen that he can be productive. And if they're peppering him with targets, we've seen wide receivers on the worst teams in the league that, they're losing. They're just getting peppered with targets, and they turn out some fantasy goodness. And so I'm already comfortable buying in on Brandon Cooks at his price. But if the news does hit one way or the other, that price is going to change, and I'll still be comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. There's no competition here. Isaiah Coulter and Kiki Kuti, those aren't guys that, are really going to command a lot of targets. So even if it is a terrible team, he might be sitting in a position where he's going to see 150 targets next year. And who he's going to see those targets from is a completely different story. Now, I know you love Davis Mills. That was your guy coming into the draft. You're a big fan of him. Who do you think we're going to see start week 1? And then do you think, well, let me ask you that first. Who's going to start week 1? Do you think it's going to be Tyrod Taylor or Davis Mills?
I think week 1 will be Tyrod Taylor. If it's
So
not
I'm going to cut
Deshaun
you.
Watson.
So I'm going to cut you off here. And then, is there going to be a time in the season where you think that we see Davis Mills take over?
If Watson's out for the year and this is a very bad team, they've got to see what they have with Davis Mills, because if they feel comfortable at all, if they feel close at all, you've got to see what you got with him, because Watson's future is very uncertain. And so you have to be able to make a decision one way or the other. Is this guy a guy that we can play, or are we? And, if they're that bad, they're going to take Spencer Rattler or Sam Howell probably, or, Willis out of Liberty, whoever it might be. They're probably going to take a quarterback in the draft. But I do think that you have to see what you have with Davis Mills.
Yeah, man, such a tough career arc for Tyrod Taylor. I hate to see it, like, and you're a Bills fan, like we saw Tyrod Taylor, he wasn't winning a ton of games, but like he looked like he finally had earned himself a long-term job in Buffalo, then went to Cleveland, and we know what happened there. Things kind of fell apart, and then he went to the Chargers where he got stabbed in the lung by a doctor. I mean, it's just been one tough break after another for this guy. And now, like you said, like he could go out and just play great football, but I don't think this team, I mean, Deshaun Watson won 14 or 4 games with this team. I don't think Tyrod Taylor is going to go out and put them in a winning position. So even if he goes out and plays great football, they're still going to be sitting under 500, and inevitably he's going to get the rug pulled out from under him. So Tyrod Taylor, I think he's 31, 32 now. No, he's getting up there in age a little bit. And I'm afraid that we're never going to really see him get an opportunity after those few years in Buffalo. And it's very sad to see, unfortunately.
It is.
Well, thank you for tuning in. And before we sign off, I just want to remind you that if you are a high stakes football player, fantasy football player, I should say, that you have a chance to win $500,000 by playing in the Footballguys Players Championship. The entry is $350 to get in, or you can build 3 teams for $1,000 and get a chance to play in a fantasy football league that has an absolutely life-changing prize. On top of the $500,000 grand prize, they're going to be giving out a total of $3.7 million for this competition. You can find the league on FFPC and draft your team as soon as possible. Jeff, I had a blast with you filling in today. We've done so many shows together. I feel like you at this point are just kind of a football guy by association. We've done shows with Sigmund Bloom. We've done shows with Matt Waldman. We've done shows with Jeff Hasley. You're writing articles as a special contributor right now. And, as soon as I called on you and said, hey, Lauren's unable to make it, you were there to step up immediately. So hope to see your face on the Footballguys YouTube channel a little bit more in the future. Do you have anything to say before we wrap up here, Jeff?
No, I just thank you again for the opportunity. It's been fantastic to anytime that I can hop on with you and we can talk about football. It's of course, I'm not going to miss the opportunity. I'm very appreciative to be able to do that. And thank you again.
Yeah, for anybody watching this show or listening to it, I hope you could feel the love just coming out right now, because Jeff is genuinely one of my best friends. And anytime we get a chance to do a show together, I just, it just warms my heart on the inside. So hopefully you'll see him around these streets a little bit more often. But I want to thank you for tuning into Footballguys 2-Point Stance. Be sure to subscribe to the Footballguys YouTube page for a new episode every Tuesday at 7 p.m. Eastern. That is youtube.com/FootballGuysTV. And you will find all the rest of the Footballguys show there. We've got the Audible. We've got On the Couch. We've got the Mailbag Show with me and Troy, the Dynasty Show with Chad and Jordan, the Dynasty Newsletter Show with Chris and Adam. The Power Grid is coming up soon, and even more to come this offseason. So youtube.com/FootballGuysTV. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next week.